Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Picture the Scene Podcast, a true crime podcast aiming to put you, the listener, at the scene of the crime. Before we get started, I want to apologise to everyone. This episode and the next episode I'd written many weeks ago, and literally the week we're due to record, my wonderful baby son decided to arrive into the world. So we had to stop recording that week, and then obviously I needed a few weeks to be with him because as much as I love all of our listeners, I love my baby son more than any of you and Rach. So we've taken a little break. And so if I look a little bit, if you're watching me on camera, if I look a little bit like haggard, it's because I am. So apologies, but it's a wonderful feeling to have. And yeah, it's at the moment I'm in the best moment of my life. So I'm very happy. So it's very hard to come and do true crime when something's so horrible, when my life is so wonderful at the moment. But thank you for being patient.
That's lovely. And for the benefit of our listeners, seeing Andrew come into this second phase of his life as a father has been absolutely amazing and delightful. And I've had the absolute pleasure of seeing babe. Are we allowed to announce his name?
Yeah.
Yes, seeing baby Jacob on camera and having a look at all the photos, all the baby spam Andrew sends me, and I can just say it's absolutely delightful. And I am absolutely confident that you will love every single day that is ahead of you and seeing him grow and watching him develop into such a beautiful, handsome little boy. I'm so excited for you, and it's lovely, and yay, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So thank you for being patient. I know people don't like long intros, so apologies
You can
for,
be excused. Your wife gave
for this one.
birth. You've become a father. We're just going to stop and pause and celebrate, and then we'll get
Yes,
into true
indeed.
crime.
So, Rach, enough about me. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm sparkling.
I'm sparkling well. Yes.
No, all good here. I've obviously missed this. I've missed us, but also conscious that it has been quite a whirlwind for you. So great to be back in the seat after 5 weeks of not recording. Thanks for coming back so early. Took me a year.
That's good. So, let's get into it. A quick content note before we get into it, though. Today's case involves a planned, prolonged assault. There's reference to weapons, knife rooms, and filmed violence. There's also an allegation of domestic abuse that sits in the background of the motive. So nothing sexualized, but it is brutal in places. So just bear that in mind before you carry on listening. And this is really important because people say, why do podcasts say these things just to sensationalize? Does podcasts say these things so people go, "Ooh, that's good, I'll make sure I listen to that 'cause there's something nasty in there"? No, we say these things because it's important. I'll give you an indicator. We had a comment on one of our cases that our recent one, Amanda O'Shaughnessy, who said that it was really hard for them to listen to the case because someone close to them in their life had been killed in the same way by their partner and had pretty much got away with it, their partner, and so it was hard for them to listen. But they thanked us for the sensitivity and the warning at the beginning that we did this. So this is why we do this. So please, if any of this is a trigger for you, we won't be offended. Turn it off and come back for the next one. Okay, so having said all that, if you're enjoying the podcast, please do take a moment to rate and review us wherever you're listening. It really does help other people find this show. And please, even if you don't want to watch us on YouTube, go and subscribe. It'd be very well appreciated. So, Rach, after all that, are you ready for some true crime?
I'm ready. I'm sure our listeners are ready. Let's get in.
So, if it's safe for you to do so, I'd like you to sit back, relax, close your eyes, and picture the scene. Nottingham, the East Midlands of England, the early hours of Sunday the 2nd of April 2023. Now, Nottingham is a city of just over 320,000 people. It sits on the River Trent in the East Midlands. It's about 50 miles northeast of Birmingham and about 130 miles north of London. It's a place most people know for Robin Hood, for 2 football clubs that share a city, and for being one of the busiest student cities in the UK. It's the kind of city where the centre is alive most nights of the week, and where the suburbs around it, Sneinton, the Meadows, Radford, St Anne's, have their own quieter rhythm, although St Anne's, from my own personal memory, wasn't always so quiet, but maybe it's better these days. On this particular weekend, it's cold. Around 4 or 5 degrees overnight. Spring hasn't really arrived yet. The clocks went forward a week ago, so the mornings are still dark at 4 a.m. and the streetlights are still doing most of the work. In a flat somewhere in the city, and we don't know the exact address. The court records don't give it. A man is asleep in bed. He's naked. He's alone in a room, and the flat isn't his. His name is Vincent Jordan, and in about an hour, 3 men he was not expecting are going to walk through the door of that flat carrying weapons, and what follows will last roughly 2 hours. By the end of it, Vincent Jordan would have been stabbed 9 times. He'll have a fractured ankle, a broken right hand, and chunks of his dreadlocks hacked off and stuffed in a sandwich bag.
God.
Part of what's done to him will be filmed on a mobile phone, and the footage will end up on Snapchat. He'll escape somehow and collapse, bleeding on the forecourt of a petrol station. He won't speak to the police though, not really. He'll give them one line, and that was that he was attacked by 3 persons with knives and poles. And then he'll go quiet. He won't testify. He won't help build a case. The men who did this to him will be convicted anyway, but Vincent Jordan himself will give the system almost nothing. And then, just over 3 years later, in April 2026, the Court of Appeal in London will sit and consider 2 appeals connected to that night. One from a man arguing his 16-year sentence was too long, the other from a man who sacked his barrister mid-trial, refused to take part in his own defence, and later claimed the judge was poisoning him with liquid radiation.
Oh my God.
So today's case...
I'm not sure I have the patience to listen to some of this, so I apologise in advance if I'm argumentative today.
Okay, that's why sometimes it's good to say up front what we're doing so people don't go, this is just nonsense, he's making this up. Today's case is a false imprisonment and assault of Vincent Jordan. The people behind it are Nathan Rochester, Olivia Williams, and Salvador Leroy Hall. And a 4th man who has never been publicly named, never been charged, and as far as I can tell, is still out there. So the question I want us to sit with through this episode is this. When a victim won't tell his own story, who gets to tell it for him? And what do they leave out? So before we get into what happened that night, we need to spend a bit of time with the people involved, because this isn't a stranger attack. This isn't a random act of violence in a city centre at chucking out time. This is something that was planned, something that grew out of a relationship and an allegation and decision that at least 3 men made together in the early hours of a Sunday morning. So let's start with Olivia Williams. We don't know a huge amount about Olivia Williams as a person. The Court of Appeal judgments, and that's our main source for this case, alongside some local reporting at the time, don't give us her age, they don't give us her background, her job, where she grew up. What they give us is a role in the events of that weekend and her relationship to the 2 of the men involved. And at the time of the offence, Williams was in what the Court of Appeal described. And Rach, I want you to brace yourself for some classical judicial understatement here. An on and off relationship with a man called Nathan Rochester. On and off. That's the official record of it.
Okay.
So we don't know how long they've been together. We don't know what the pattern of it was. We don't know whether on and off meant weeks apart or years apart. But we know it was a kind of relationship where, when something happened to Olivia Williams, Nathan Rochester took it seriously enough to plan a violent revenge on her behalf. And something, according to Williams, had happened.
Right.
Williams told Rochester that she had been abused by a man called Vincent Jordan. Now, I want to be careful here, Rach. The allegation was never tested in a courtroom. Vincent Jordan was never charged with any offence against Olivia Williams. He was never tried, never convicted, never given the chance to answer that allegation in front of a jury or anyone else. The Court of Appeal records the allegation as a stated motivation for what Nathan Rochester and the others did. It doesn't endorse it, it doesn't reject it, it simply notes that this is the reason they gave themselves for what followed.
And I think that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does, but it's an uncomfortable place though, Rach, if I'm being honest, for myself, and or maybe to sit for our listeners as well, because we have to sit there honestly, because 2 things can be true at the same time. It can be true that Olivia Williams was genuinely abused by Vincent Jordan, and it can be true that what was done to him in response was unlawful, planned, brutal, and a long way outside anything that any justice system would call proportionate. Those 2 things don't cancel each other out. They sit alongside each other, and they make this case harder than it first looks.
But I just think it's important to say that regardless of what happens, and we're not going to dive into did he, didn't he, pull or start the trigger that led to the consequences, but you can't take the law into your own hands. Like, the individuals that stormed the flat that he was sleeping in that evening, the early morning of that day, cannot and should not get to say, he abused or attacked or hurt this person, therefore, that's why I did what I did. They don't have a leg to stand on. That's, they go to the police station, they can make, reports and have it on record. But I just don't believe that they have a leg to stand on if they say, oh yeah, but we only did this because he started it. That argument's left on the playground, right?
Yeah, it is. So that's Olivia Williams, the person who made the allegation, and the person who, according to the court, lured Vincent Jordan to the address where the attack took place. So next we have Nathan Rochester. Now Rochester was 32 years old at the time of the offence. Same age as it happens as Salvador Hall, who we're going to get to in a moment. Now the court didn't say much about his background either, but we can piece a little bit together. That he was in an on and off relationship with Williams. He had a phone that he used to film or to receive footage of what happened that night. And we know from the trial that he had previous form for not behaving himself in a courtroom. Because here's the thing about Nathan Rochester. When the trial finally started, and it took several abortive attempts to get it started, which tells you something in the first place, he sacked his leading counsel partway through. He just dismissed them. Told the judge that he didn't want to take part in his own trial. The judge, a man called His Honour Judge Rafferty, then had to make a decision about whether the trial could carry on without him in the room. The judge ruled that it could carry on. He described Rochester on the record as, and I'm quoting from the appeal judgment here, by accident or design, bent on disrupting the proceedings, and he called him an unruly defendant. So Rochester was given a chance to come back, to hear his co-defendants give evidence, to give evidence himself if he wanted to, but he declined. So the trial finished without him, and the jury convicted him anyway. And then, after his conviction, Nathan Rochester filed an appeal. The grounds of that appeal are some of the most extraordinary I've come across in any case we've ever covered, Rach. And we're going to come back to them properly at the end of this episode. But just to give you a taster, Rochester claimed, among many other things, that the judge was poisoning him with liquid radiation and that the judge was a sex offender.
Oh my God. This guy sounds like a treat.
Yes, so the Court of Appeal, in case you're wondering, was not persuaded.
Good.
The third person we need to talk about is Salvador Leroy Hall. Well, Hall was also 32 at the time of the offence. He was a registered keeper of a Mercedes. He owned, or at least had access to, an American military service pistol, a Remington Rand .45 ACP. That's a sidearm originally manufactured for the United States Armed Forces. It's the kind of gun that has absolutely no civilian business being on the streets of an English city in 2023.
So, are we indicating that he was serving in the armed forces in a
No.
past life? No. Oh, so he's bought it on the black market, right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So Hall's role in this story is interesting because, according to the Court of Appeal, he was brought into the plan late. He didn't come up with the idea. He didn't have a relationship with Olivia Williams. He didn't even have a motive to harm Vincent Jordan personally. He was, as far as the court could tell, recruited. He was hired to do a job.
Which makes it even worse.
Well, yeah, you could argue that. His own barrister argued at the appeal that this should count in his favour, though. That because Hall was a late addition, because he had no personal reason to want Jordan hurt, his sentence should have been lower than Rochester's. And the Court of Appeal disagreed in a way I think is worth quoting properly because, again, it tells you something about how the law thinks about this kind of violence. The court said, and I'm reading directly now, we see no mitigating feature in the fact, if so, that he had no underlying reason or motive to harm Vincent Jordan. If anything, the absence of that feature only emphasises the culpability of his own conduct. So, Rach, this is exactly what you just said. The absence of motive emphasises his culpability.
I was just about to argue as well. You can, when someone's romantically involved or, there's a friendship, there's a reason why you feel so protective of an individual that you go and seek out, revenge. I'm not condoning it whatsoever. Stand by my point. You can't take the law into your own hands. When you can be so easily influenced or recruited, whatever term you want to call it, into a crime, that in my opinion, is 10 times more dangerous than the original perpetrator, because what's to say that you aren't, recruited into future crimes by random people? Obviously, if you don't have a vested interest in the outcome of the victim, you are even more dangerous in my eyes, because you are more likely to offend and therefore require a lot more rehabilitation than your peer who, took something very personally and decided to.
Do you know what, Rach? That's a really sharp observation. And do you remember he also had a gun with him, an illegal gun? But that's a really
Yeah.
sharp observation. So the court is essentially saying, as you just said, at least Nathan Rochester had a reason, however twisted, however unlawful. He thought he was avenging his partner. Salvador Hall, he didn't even have that. He turned up because he was asked to turn up. He participated in 2 hours of sustained deliberate cruelty against a man he had no quarrel with, and he did it because someone he knew said this was what we're doing tonight.
Yeah.
So that's just colder than anything. So you should be a court of appeal judge, Rach.
Right. Sign me up.
So finally, and this is the part of the story that I keep coming back to, there's a fourth man. The Court of Appeal judgment refers to him only as another. 3 men entered that night. Rochester, Hall, and one other. The one other had never been publicly named. He has not been charged, he's not been tried, then he's not been convicted of anything in connection with this case. As far as I can find from open source reporting, no one has ever publicly identified who he is. But he was in the flat for those 2 hours. He took part in the assault, and he left when the others left. And then he disappeared into ordinary life, so he's still out there now. So those are the people. Olivia Williams, who made the allegation and made the call, Nathan Rochester, the partner, the planner, the one who later unraveled in court, and Salvador Hall, the late recruit with the gun in his car, and the unnamed fourth person who walked out of that flat and was never held to account.
On the Snapchat
No.
videos? It's
No.
crackers?
Yeah. He might be taking it, we don't know, actually.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
But
I didn't think about that.
How you allude any sort of, and if it's intentional as well done, but probably unintentional. And, that man's probably the exact kind of person that we talk about, fearing, in future, that he's sat there waiting for a knock on the door because somebody is able to confess or identify him. He must live with uncertainty every day of his life, right?
Yeah, you'd imagine so, unless he's a psychopath, but yeah, you'd imagine so. So now we're going to go back to the night itself, to the law, to the moment Vincent Jordan opened the door or didn't get to open the door, and to what happened in the 2 hours that followed. So let's get back to that flat in Nottingham, Rach. It's somewhere in the early hours of Sunday, the 2nd of April, 2020. We don't know the exact address, the court records don't give it, and I've not been able to find it in any local reporting. But what we do know is that it's an address that Oliver Williams could get Vincent Jordan to come to. Whether it was hers, whether it was a friend's, we don't know. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But it was a place Jordan trusted enough to go to, and trusted enough to take his clothes off and get into bed. And that matters. He got his clothes off, got naked, and got into bed. So he was not ambushed in the street. He was not jumped getting out of a taxi. He was not attacked walking home from a night out. He was lured to an address by a woman he knew, and knew well enough at some point at night he ended up in bed, naked, and asleep.
And I'm just going to make an assumption here that you're probably not going to want to stand by, but I'm guessing a friend of Olivia's, right? Or an acquaintance of Olivia's. It's a setup, right? It's a sting.
No, Olivia took him to that place.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Ignore that then, sorry.
No, it's good, because if you're thinking that, other people probably are. Maybe I wasn't clear enough, but no, Olivia lured him to that flat. He trusts Olivia enough to go to that flat and to get naked and get into bed, and then fall asleep, actually. So who knows what he did to make him fall asleep, but it's interesting that if he abused Olivia Williams, he wasn't suspicious that she was willing
to go back,
to go to a flat with him alone and for him to get naked.
Yeah.
Because surely you'd be suspicious. I mean, I'm not abused anyone, but surely if you abuse someone, if someone is suddenly being, let's do anything you want, surely you're going to think, well, hang on, I've abused this person. Why are they letting me do this?
And
I don't know.
Also, can I just add, the fact that she was willing to put herself at risk of potential further abuse? Because, let's say, for argument's sake, our victim here is abusive. And how do you not know that second time round he thinks, oh, she's back for more? let's go a little bit worse this time. Like, as a victim herself, would her guard not be up? Like, would she be
Yeah.
worried about how, things might turn out? She might get 2 black eyes this time. I don't know what the abuse that she's claiming was, but is it going to be 10 times worse this time? And could I come out of this alive? Like, surely if you were abused, that you'd have that level of concern and worry as well as the victim. But that's just my view. Easy for me to say.
So listen to this, Rach. Listen to this carefully. The Court of Appeal makes a specific finding about this, and it's one of the more chilling parts of the judgment. The court found, and I'm quoting here, that it was part of the plan that Vincent Jordan should be in bed naked so as to put him at a disadvantage and unable to reach for any weapon that he might have had with him. So it was part of a plan to get him naked.
And vulnerable as well, because if you're going to jump out of bed, if you're going to get jumped on by 3 people and you're going to jump out of bed, your first thing is probably not to get a weapon, but it is to put some clothes on or cover. You are immediately using, you've got one hand that's unable to protect and defend because you're keeping the bedsheet up. There's that level, that extra layer of vulnerability, isn't there?
Yeah. And do you know what, Rach? This is why I love doing this with you. We've been doing this for so long. You know exactly how the way I think, how the way I talk, because just listen to my next paragraph here, because it's exactly what you just said. So Olivia didn't just lure Vincent to the address, she lured him into a state of complete vulnerability, asleep, naked, unarmed, comfortable, trusting, and that was a design, that was a trap. So you've literally said better than what I put in a sentence, so it's great that you know exactly how I think. But so while he was in that state, while he was naked, asleep in bed, so not just naked in bed, asleep, so some time would have had to pass, 3 men were on their way to the flat. We don't know how they arrived. We don't know whether they came together in one car separately. We don't know who unlocked the door or whether the door was open for them. What we do know is that at some point in the early hours, Nathan Rochester, Salvador Hall, and the third unnamed man entered the flat carrying weapons. Now, the Court of Appeal describes them as heavy weapons, and that's a phrase used, heavy weapons. Vincent Jordan himself, in the one short statement he gave to police, said that he was attacked with knives and poles. So we're talking about bladed weapons. We're talking about something blunt and substantial. Pieces of wood, metal bars, something along those lines. Heavy enough to break bones. Heavy enough to be the kind of weapon a court doesn't describe as a household object.
Believe it or not, I really struggle when weapons aren't a gun or a knife and are more basic, items that you find in B&Q. And these kind of stores, because that, for me, feels so much more intentional. And I mean by it's easy to grab a knife, in a sense, from a kitchen. And if you really want to, it's quite easy to find a gun. But to get a pole that's light enough to carry, but hard enough to hit somebody with, pieces of wood, especially when they've got nails in them. There's so much intent that's gone into finding, locating, and maneuvering with that weapon. I just feel like the premeditation is just next level for me.
So what happens next lasts roughly 2 hours. And 2 hours, when I was writing this, I was thinking, sometimes we just skim past this so easily. Like, we read past it when we write a script and people listen to it and go 2 hours. But think about it, 2 hours, it's a long film. It's a Premier League match, including half time. It's the length of a long lunch with a friend. And for the entirety of that time, Vincent Jordan, naked, unarmed, outnumbered 3-1, is being held inside that flat against his will and being beaten with weapons.
But fearing for his life, not just in absolute agony and pain, but wondering, when is this going to stop so I can escape? Or when's it going to stop so that I die? You don't like, the torture for the 2 hour period must be insane.
Yeah, definitely. And at some stage, and not only he's saying, but because at some stage during that 2 hours, his hands are tied. And we know that because there's a video, which makes it insane, because not only is he, you're right, thinking all those things, we know from these videos, like, sadly, we can find these videos online if we really want to. We know that when these things are filmed, you can tell the people filming them are doing them with enjoyment. So not only would it have been being beaten, and fearing for his life, he would have seen people laughing and enjoying what they were doing to him, which makes it even worse.
Harder, yeah.
So I'm going to come to the video properly in a minute, but let me just place it for you now. At least part of what happened in that flat was filmed on a mobile phone. So the video shows Vincent Jordan badly injured with his hands bound, and it was later posted to Snapchat, and it was recovered from Nathan Rochester's phone by police. So the police saw this, and it wasn't just an assault. It was an assault that attackers wanted a record of, and that's a specific kind of cruelty. Someone wants to be able to enjoy watching themselves beat a man. So that isn't just someone losing their
It's a
temper.
trophy, that.
It's not even just revenge. Exactly. It's when wanting something to look back at, wanting something to share, wanting evidence, but evidence on your own terms, controlled by you for your own purposes. So the judge at sentencing made a finding about that filming. I want to read this one out in full because I think it's important. The judge said the filming, and I quote, was done as a lasting souvenir. It showed that the assailants were enjoying what they were doing. They were singing a song to add to his torture and discomfort. By that stage, he had been bleeding heavily and was barely conscious. So they were singing a song, enjoying themselves while attacking him, Rach.
It's just beyond belief. It's beyond belief that somebody can hurt another human with intent like that, but then to enjoy it and get so much pleasure from it.
So that's the moment, I think, where I think anyone reads the judgment, you have to stop and put it down for a second. Because the violence on its own is appalling. The fact that it was planned is appalling. The fact that he was lured into vulnerability is appalling. But the singing, I think the singing is something else. And that's a detail that tells you what kind of room this was. That these were not people who'd lost control. These were not people who'd been overtaken by rage. They were in control. They were enjoying themselves. They'd made a soundtrack to their enjoyment for the evening. And at some point, during that 2 hours, somebody takes a blade to Vincent Jordan's dreadlocks. Now, the judge made a specific finding about this too. He found that the dreadlocks were caught in the knowledge that they were a matter of importance to him. And that's a deliberate phrase. The court isn't saying that the dreadlocks got caught in the assault, that they came off as part of the assault. The court isn't saying that they were collateral. The court is saying and accepting that the people in the flat knew what those dreadlocks meant to Vincent Jordan, and they cut them off because they meant something to him. So, for people out there thinking, well, it's hair, why is it important? For
Someone's
a lot
identity,
of black men,
though.
yeah, exactly. For a lot of black men, particularly men of African or Caribbean heritage, dreadlocks are not just hair. They can be cultural, they can be spiritual, they can be personal in a way that takes years to grow and seconds to destroy. And by saying, because Vincent Jordan was a black man, and so the people who attacked him knew exactly what they were taking from him when they took that hair from him. So they wanted to humiliate him.
I was just about to say they're also dehumanizing him. Like,
yes,
like you've used the word not collateral, humiliation. Like, they don't care. And that's in my opinion, that's just an added element of this, like, of them showing how little they care. I don't give two shits about your hair, and I'm going to show you that. And it's horrible. Like, the same way, and I gather they didn't take the dreadlocks as a trophy, but you can tell me they did, I don't know, but it's the same way that you hear that people take jewelry of victims, or these trophies of these small parts of their life that remind the abusers, the criminals, that they have been standing in that room at that moment with that victim, and almost relive it, don't they? And it's not fair.
You're exactly right, but actually you are wrong about one thing here, Rach, because some of those dreadlocks would be put into a small clear sandwich bag, and the kind that you'd put a school lunch in. So that sandwich bag is going to become important in about 48 hours, but we're not there yet. We're still at the flat. So at some point during this 2 hours of sustained assault, Vincent Jordan somehow, I don't know how, he manages to escape. So I thought about this a lot, everyone, reading the judgment. Court doesn't tell us how, because he wouldn't like participate with them. He wouldn't talk to the police. So there's no description of the moment. So we don't know if the door was left unlocked. We don't know if he made a run for it during a pause. We don't know if his attackers got distracted, or if he played dead, or if one of them stepped out of the room. So whatever happened, whatever combination of luck and desperation and survival instincts it took, Jordan got out of that. So he was let me just go over what was, by now, how injured he was. He was bleeding heavily. He was bound or recently bound. His hands were shattered. The bones in his hands were shattered. His ankle was fractured. He was naked and he had chunks of hair missing. And he still manages to run with a fractured ankle. He still manages to run. We don't know how far. We don't know in which direction, but he runs far enough on a fractured ankle in the early hours of a cold April morning in Nottingham to reach the forecourt of a petrol station. And there, finally, he collapses. And this is where I opened the episode, with a man on a forecourt, under the strip lights, bleeding onto the concrete. And that moment, the one that started this episode, is the end of the 2 hours we've just walked through. So an ambulance is called. He's taken to hospital. The injuries are catalogued. 9 knife wounds, a fractured right hand, a fractured ankle, dreadlocks missing. And almost immediately, Vincent stops talking. He gives the police one sentence: attacked by 3 persons with knives and poles. And after that, absolutely nothing. So I'm going to come back to the silence because I think it's why I chose this case, really. It's one of the most interesting parts of this case. But for now, let's leave him in hospital and follow what happens next. Because Salvador Hall is about to make a decision that's going to put him on the radar of every armed officer in Nottinghamshire. He's about to get in the Mercedes. It's now the evening of Tuesday, the 4th of April, 2023. 2 days have passed since Vincent Jordan collapsed on that petrol station forecourt. He's still in hospital. His wounds have been catalogued, recorded. He's given the police that one short sentence: attacked by 3 persons with knives and poles. And beyond that, he said absolutely nothing. But the police haven't been standing still. Because here's the thing about a city like Nottingham in 2023. Cameras absolutely everywhere. There's ANPR, that's automatic number plate recognition, on most main roads. There are private CCTV systems on every petrol station, every shop, every block of flats. And when a man turns up bleeding from 9 knife wounds at 4 in the morning, the police don't need a victim's witness statement to start pulling threads to put their story together. So within those 48 hours, officers have identified a vehicle they believe is connected to the assault, a Mercedes, and they've identified the registered keeper of that Mercedes, Salvador Leroy Hall. And on the evening of the 4th of April, officers spot the Mercedes on the road in Nottingham. Hall is driving, and they move to stop him. But, Rach, he doesn't stop. What follows is a police pursuit through the streets of Nottingham. Now, we don't have the full route in the court records, and they don't even really matter, but we know enough to picture it. A Mercedes being chased by marked police vehicles, sirens, blue lights, the kind of pursuit that, depending on what part of city it goes through, would have woken people up, would have had curtain switching, and would have ended up in many local Facebook groups within hours. And at some point during that chase, or does something extraordinary. He winds down the window and he throws something out. It's small, it's clear, it's a plastic sandwich bag. The kind of cheap, transparent zip top bag you'd pack a sandwich in for work, child's lunchbox. Light enough that the wind catches it. It tumbles out of the window of a moving Mercedes onto the road behind him. Now the police see it. They mark the location, but they can't stop because the chase continues. The Mercedes is eventually stopped and Hall is arrested.
Thank God.
So then when he's arrested, the officers go back to the spot where the bag landed. They recover it, and inside that bag, Rach, is human hair. Dreadlocks. The same dreadlocks that 48 hours earlier had been hacked off Vincent Jordan's head while he was bleeding and barely conscious on the floor of a flat in Nottingham. So you said, was it a trophy? Remember, Hall was the man with no skin in the game, was the man who didn't know Vincent Jordan, had nothing against him. He went there because he was asked to go there, but he's the one that kept the trophy. He's the one that kept the dreadlocks in the bag, yeah. And so, what kind of man is that then?
Imagine
Why did he
finding
keep
that.
it?
Imagine finding that bag as well. Say, for instance, this wasn't caught on camera, but he chucked it out in a blind spot for the police. Imagine finding that bag. It would just feel very sinister, wouldn't it? Like a fucking sandwich bag with dreadlocks in, like...
So, you're perfectly right, Rach, but think about what that bag represents. Because think about it, everyone. 48 hours have passed since the assault. 48 hours, that's 2 days, 2 breakfasts, 2 nights of sleep, and if any of these people have slept. And in those 48 hours, Salvador Hall has been driving around Nottingham with a small sandwich bag containing another human being's hair, somewhere in his car, maybe in the glove compartment, maybe in a door pocket under a seat, it doesn't matter. He didn't throw it away. He didn't burn it. He didn't bury it in a field to get rid of the evidence. He kept it. So, Why is the question. And I think there's two ways to read this. I don't think either of them are good. So the first is what you said, Rach, is to keep it as a souvenir, as a trophy. That the hair, like the video that went on Snapchat, it was a trophy, something to look at, something to remember the night by, something to remember how much fun you had. That's what the judge found about the filming, that the men were enjoying what they did and they wanted to record it. So the sandwich bag on that reading is a piece of the video. It's part of the same impulse. We did this. We have proof. We have a piece of him. There's a second reading which is a lot colder. And the second reading is that the hair wasn't kept by accident or just for sentiment. It was kept because Hall just didn't know what to do with it. Because getting rid of evidence is actually quite difficult. And a small bag of hair in your car feels manageable. Until that is manageable, that is, until you've got the police behind you with blue lights on, and suddenly that small manageable thing becomes the most incriminating object that you've ever owned. Because they didn't know, remember, before this, like, I know they knew his car, but in his head, they didn't know who he was.
No.
So his only option would be to throw it out of the window and hope.
Plays to his naivety. He's just stupid, isn't he?
Yeah. So either way though, Rach, whichever way you look at it, the sandwich bag tells you something about the kind of mind that was driving that Mercedes. So he was arrested at the scene of the stop. The Mercedes is impounded, forensic stop, the hair is bagged properly this time into an evidence bag, not a sandwich bag, and it's sent for examination. And the next day, on the 5th of April, officers go back to the spot where the Mercedes was stopped, just to do a proper sweep of the area. Standard procedure, look around, see if anything's been discarded nearby. And they find a shoulder bag. It's just sitting there, near where the Mercedes came to a halt. It's a kind of bag that could be easily missed, a regular shoulder bag, the kind that anyone might carry. But when they open it, they find something that turns this case from a serious assault investigation into something much bigger. Inside that shoulder bag is a pistol that we spoke about. The US Army Remington Rand .45 automatic Colt pistol. So, to tell you about these pistols, they were originally designed in the early 1900s, manufactured in huge numbers during the Second World War, and issued to American troops. It's a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol that's a large round, a heavy round, designed for stopping power rather than for sport shooting. So it's designed to kill. And is by any sensible measure a serious firearm. And also, for those people outside of the UK, in 2023, it's completely illegal for a private individual to own. You can't get a license for this type of gun. So under the Firearms Act 1968, a handgun with a barrel less than 30 centimeters in length is classed as a prohibited weapon. And prohibited weapons aren't like ordinary firearms where you can apply for a license and jump through hoops. Prohibited weapons are simply not available to civilians. Possessing one carries a minimum sentence of 5 years imprisonment, regardless of mitigation. You can't get less than 5 years if you possess one,
But there's no reason to possess one other than to potentially be needing to harm somebody, right?
But it wasn't just a prohibited weapon though, Rach. It was a loaded prohibited weapon. The pistol contained live rounds and the kind of rounds that it was designed to fire. And importantly, Rach, the safety catch on the gun was set to fire position. So the police did note there was no round in the chamber. So the gun, as it sat in the bag, couldn't have been fired the instant someone picked it up. But the difference between that state and the state of immediate readiness was one action, one pull of the slide. I'm sure we've seen it in films where people pull the top of the gun back. And so the judge described it as an illegal loaded, safety off weapon. It may be that there was nothing in the chamber, but beyond cocking a gun, that it was ready to go. So in the window of 48 hours, Salvador Hall has gone from participating in a planned, prolonged filmed assault of a man on a flat, to driving a Mercedes around Nottingham with a sandwich bag full of hair, to being chased by the police, to discarding the hair out the window, to being stopped, to being arrested, to having an American military pistol with a safety off, recovered from a bag a few feet from where his car came to a stop. So, what that tells us, Rach, what it tells me, and please disagree with me in the comments if anyone disagrees, this is not the timeline of a man who's panicking and trying to lay low. That's the timeline of a man who is, in his own words, actually, was on his way to deliver that gun to someone else in Derby. So that's what he later told the court in trial. He said he was taking the gun to an unknown male in Derby. He didn't explain who, he wouldn't. He didn't explain why. He didn't explain what the man in Derby was going to do with it, but the court drew its own conclusion. The Court of Appeal would later say, that even on his own account, the gun was being moved with intention. And I'm quoting that the intention that it would be used to threaten or to cause fear by another. So that's what we're dealing with here. a man within 48 hours of taking part in a torture revenge attack that was acting as, in his own words, a courier for a loaded weapon bound for somebody else to then cause fear with, at the very least. So the judge said that the gun could not be said to have anything to do with the assault on Vincent Jordan. There was no evidence linking the pistol to the attack in the flat, but the judge did say that the gun demonstrated that the appellant, Salvador Hall, was still in the market for criminal activity, that he was still planning to do more crime. So still in the market. So he still wanted to do more crime. So now I want us to move forward in time again, this time to the next year, 2024, to a Crown Court in Nottingham, to His Honour Judge Rafferty, and to a trial that, before it even began properly, was going to be derailed by Nathan Rochester. So we're going to go over that trial now. So it's May 2024. We're at the Crown Court in Nottingham. It's a large modern courtroom in the centre of the city. Judge, His Honour Judge Rafferty, he's a senior circuit judge. He's not new to this rage. He's got years of experience handling serious criminal trials. The prosecution's ready. The defence teams are in place. The jury's been sworn in. And after a number of abortive starts, the trial of Nathan, Salvador, and Olivia finally is about to get underway. So the trial begins properly on the 21st of May, 2024. So each of the three defendants is represented by their own defence barristers. Nathan Rochester is the man we've been calling the planner in all of this, the partner, the one who allegedly orchestrated all of this in revenge for what Olivia Williams said to her had been done to her. He's represented by a leading counsel. Again, someone who's brand new to this, senior barrister, King's Counsel, top tier trial advocate in the English legal system. And you don't get a leading counsel for a shoplifting case, Rach.
No.
You're given one because the charges against you are serious enough that the courts and the legal aid system have decided you need someone of real experience standing next to you.
Mm-hmm.
So he walks into that courtroom with one of the best advocates available to him. And then partway through the trial, he sacks him. So think about that, because sacking your leading counsel in the middle of a trial for false imprisonment and grievous bodily harm with intent, which is what he was charged with, is not a small decision. It's not something a person with a working understanding of their own self-interest does. Your barrister is a person standing between you and potentially a life sentence.
But is that not just an example of his defiance towards the law?
It could be, yeah, but...
What are you going to do that I can't?
That's true, but he knows the evidence. He's prepared the cross-examinations. He's planned his closing speech. He's done the bulk of the work to keep him out of prison. You're right. You might be right here, H, actually, because I think there's only two reasons why he would do this. Your relationship has either gone really wrong with them, or something has gone wrong with how you're thinking about the trial. And the judge at the time concluded it was a second of these things, that it was because something had gone wrong with how Nathan Rochester was thinking about the trial. Because after dismissing his counsel, he told the judge that he didn't want to take part in the trial at all. Or he didn't want to be put in the courtroom, he didn't want to be represented, he didn't want to give evidence, he just wanted to be removed from the process.
And
People are thinking,
what's
well,
in his
fine.
mind to be like, well, how's it going to play out? Are they just going to, if I don't want to be involved in this, they're just going to drop it? It's just crackers,
Maybe,
isn't
yeah.
it?
But it actually put the judge in a difficult position, because there's a principle in English criminal law that you have the right to be present at your own trial. It's a fundamental part of how the system works. The defendant gets to see the evidence against them. The defendant gets to hear the witnesses. They get to instruct the lawyers in real time. And that's the bedrock of it. Trial in absentia, as they're called, trials where the defendant isn't there, they're not the default. They are a rare exception. But there's a counterweight, though, to that principle. And the counterweight is this: a defendant cannot bring a criminal trial to a halt just by refusing to take part in it. If a defendant could simply walk out of a court and force the whole process to stop, then no one would ever be convicted of anything serious, would they? Because they'd just all walk out and say, I don't want to do this anymore. So the system does have to continue. So the judge had to weigh two principles: the defendant's right to be present against a public interest in the trial proceeding. And the judge, to be fair to him, did think about this carefully. And he gave what the appeal court would later describe as a detailed ruling on the 24th of May 2024, so a few days into the trial. In that ruling, he set out his reasoning. He looked at established case law. He looked at the specific circumstances of Rochester's behaviour, and he concluded that the trial could and should continue without him. So in doing so, he said something on the record, I think is worth quoting because it tells you exactly what the judge was dealing with. And I said this earlier. So he said by accident or design that he was bent on disrupting the proceedings. So by accident or design. So I think the judge was really smart here because he probably knew there'd be an appeal. So he's being very careful with his language. So the judge isn't saying that he's deliberately trying to derail his own trial because that could show bias.
Yeah.
The judge is saying that he might be doing it deliberately or he might be doing it for other reasons. So what he also isn't doing is making a clinical diagnosis. He isn't a psychiatrist. He isn't qualified to say whether he's mentally well or unwell. And again, if he did, that could cause a mistrial. Whether he understands, he didn't say whether he understands what's happening, whether there's something deeper going on. He's just saying, or whatever the reason, he's disrupting proceedings and they've got to continue. So they did continue. And the prosecution presented his case. The witnesses gave the evidence. The video that had been recovered from Rochester's phone was shown to the jury. The forensics were laid out. The evidence was put before the court. The chronology of the planning, the law, the assault, the escape, the arrest of Hall 2 days later, the recovery of the sandwich bag, recovery of the gun. That was all put before the 12 members of the public in a courtroom in Nottingham. I'm not going to go over that again because we've already gone over it. And he wasn't in the room for any of it. So, but the judge also, it shows how experienced he was. He did something very important here to, again, avoid any possible chance of an appeal. He gave Nathan a way back in. So after the close of the prosecution case, he was given a chance to return to court, to hear his co-defendants give evidence, to give evidence himself if he wanted to put his side of his story to the jury. So again, the judge stopped and made sure that he was clear he could come back and start taking part again without any prejudice. He declined. So the trial finished without him. Olivia Williams and Salvador Hall, they presented their cases. The closing speeches were given. The judge directed the jury on the law, but the judge also specifically directed the jury that Nathan's absence was not evidence against him. Again, the judge was so smart here. He told the jury that you couldn't hold him not being there as him being guilty. So he gave appropriate and conventional directions that they can't hold it against him and it must not affect their judgment. So that was good because then that takes one defense or one case of appeal again out of action. And he told them basically to decide the case and evidence, and they did. I mean, he was on video attacking this man. It's hard to find someone not guilty for that. And he was convicted on both counts, false imprisonment and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Olivia and Salvador were also convicted, and later Hall would also be convicted for the firearms offences, which we covered, but he would actually plead guilty to the firearms offences. So they were all sentenced. Nathan would get 12 years imprisonment. Would get 8 years imprisonment. Salvador Hall, he would get 16 years imprisonment in total. 10 for the false imprisonment, with 6 concurrent for the Section 18 assault, and then 6 years consecutive, not concurrent, years for the firearms offences. So the longest of the 3 would be actually because of the gun.
Yeah, okay. I actually think ultimately his longest sentence as well, or the longer sentence, is absolutely valid because of what we spoke about before.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And essentially, people are sentenced because they're a danger to society. There's a need for rehabilitation and to keep them off the streets. But there's also a sentencing protocol to reflect, the severity of what this individual's done and to put other people off doing the same in future, right? The sentencing and the
Exactly
amount
right.
of time that people spend in jail, there's several factors that go into it, and you're trying to discourage young, impressionable individuals or just impressionable individuals or other people from supporting their friends. And, when these things hit the press, this individual was sentenced to longer because of the danger he poses and the fact that, you used the term no skin in the game. That's so important because it tells a story.
Yeah, it does, you're right. But we know Nathan Rochester wasn't finished because within weeks of his conviction, he's sitting in his prison cell. He was to appeal his conviction. He wrote to the Court of Appeal, and the thing is, they have to consider everything that someone puts forward as grounds for appeal. They were completely extraordinary. So we're going to look at these grounds now. So it's now April 2026 when the appeal gets heard, a couple of months ago. 2 years have passed since the trial. Vincent Jordan is somewhere getting on with his life. We don't know where. Olivia Williams, Salvador Hall, and Nathan Rochester, they're all in prison, working through their sentences. But 2 of them appealed. Salvador Hall appealed against his sentence, the length of sentence. Nathan Rochester appealed against the entire conviction. So 1 sentence, 1 against the conviction. So 3 judges made up the Court of Appeal for this one. Lord Justice Dove presiding, Mr. Justice Sewell, who would deliver both of the judgments in the end, and His Honour Judge Edmund Casey, who was the recorder of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. They were all sitting as judges on a Court of Appeal that day. So let's take them one at a time, and let's start with the more conventional one, where the one that doesn't involve poisoning or sex offenders. So Hall's appeal was, in legal terms, a serious and properly argued challenge. He was represented by barrister Miss R. Coleman, and the grounds of his appeal were that his sentence at 16 years in total was manifestly excessive. So that phrase, manifestly excessive, is a test in English sentence appeals. It doesn't mean a bit too long. It doesn't mean I would have given him less. It means the sentence is so far outside the reasonable range that a sensible judge couldn't have arrived on it. So it's a very high bar. Well, it's a very high bar, and most sentence appeals fail because it's really hard to prove that. Because the sentencing judge is the one who heard the trial, who heard the evidence, who saw the defendants, and is in the best position usually to make the call. So unless it's really odd, I know you gave a chuckle, but unless it's really odd, it's hard to appeal. But his barrister, Miss Coleman.
I chuckled because you're almost reflecting, not only has my client been treated unfairly, but the sentencing judge doesn't have a fucking clue what he's doing. And that caused me to chuckle, because I'm like, well, you know, you're being excessively cheeky there in saying that the sentencing judge doesn't know what he's doing, or has unfairly sentenced him, almost like he's gone, fuck it, today I'm just going to break the rules. Like, who do you think you are? Sorry. And I know that these people have to defend. I know that you know, someone has to defend the criminals, but fucking hell, it makes me chuckle. Carry on.
No, you're right. So his barrister, Miss Coleman, argued 4 grounds for his appeal. The first was that 10 years for the false imprisonment was just too long. The second was that the judge should have drawn a distinction between Nathan and Salvador, that Salvador was a late recruit, not a planner, and he shouldn't have got the same sentence as the man who'd organised the whole thing. And thirdly, that the gun offence should have been categorised lower on sentencing guidelines, placed in a category 2A rather than a 1A, producing a starting point of 7 years instead of 8. And fourth, the principle of totality hadn't been properly applied. So totality is a legal concept, everyone, that essentially means when you're sentencing someone for multiple offences, you have to step back at the end and ask whether the overall sentence is just and proportionate. That you can't just add up the individual sentences and stop there. You have to look at the whole package. So these were serious arguments. They were properly put forward, and the Court of Appeal considered each of them in turn. On the first ground that 10 years was too long for the false imprisonment, the Court of Appeal simply said no. The judge had been entitled to reach that figure, and the case had, from what the court called, vicious, sustained, gleeful, and deliberately humiliating brutality. And so 10 years was fine. On the second ground, that Salvador should have got less than Rochester, the court gave the response that we mentioned earlier, that you agreed with, Roach, and that there's no mitigating feature in the fact. So if he had no underlying reason or motive to harm Vincent Jordan, then that emphasises his culpability. So they again said, no, don't be silly. That's not a good reason. On the third ground, that the gun, the court said the trial judge had been entitled to place it in category 1A, the high-risk category, a loaded American military pistol, safety off, being transported across the country to be handed to another unknown person who he wouldn't identify. The court said that the trial judge was fully entitled to reach the conclusion that the risks identified in the high category were present.
Good.
And the fourth ground, though, totality, the court found that the trial judge had taken totality into account. He reduced the gun sentence from what might otherwise have been to reflect the overall length of the sentence. So they basically said it would have been a higher sentence for the gun if he wouldn't have taken totality into consideration.
Okay.
So Salvador Hall's appeal was dismissed. He
Yeah.
got 16 years.
You prick.
So that was his appeal. It was properly argued, properly considered, and properly refused. So now let's come to Nathan Rochester, shall we? And so this is where this episode takes a turn. So thanks for sticking with us, everyone. So we've been recording, because we recorded this episode and our next episode in one go. We've been recording all morning, and Rach has to go and pick up her daughter from school, which, is kind of important. So we're going to let her drop off now and say goodbye. And I'm going to wrap up with the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. So, Rachel, thank you. Any last final words?
I would just say good luck to everyone that's going to be screaming at anything that you say that is going to be hugely frustrating, because I won't be here to represent your screaming, and I'm sorry about that.
That's fine. Thank you, Rachel,
Okay.
and I'll chat to you soon.
Bye.
So, everyone, this is where the episode takes a turn. Because Nathan Rochester's appeal is not a sentence appeal. It's an appeal against his conviction. So he's arguing, essentially, that he should not have been convicted at all, that his trial was unfair, that the evidence didn't support the verdict, that a number of things went wrong in a courtroom in May and June 2024, and they were the things were serious enough that the Court of Appeal should quash his conviction and let him out. So by this stage, he's acting on his own. The appeal judgment notes that it was a non-counsel application, meaning that he had no barrister representing him at the appeal. He'd written the grounds himself in letters to court. He'd filed them out of time, 43 days late. So he's also asking the Court of Appeal to give him an extension of that time to allow the appeal to go ahead at all. So I'm trying to be measured here, people. What he wrote in these letters is extraordinary. The grounds are set out in the appeal judgment run to 10 separate points. So I'm going to read it to you as the Court of Appeal recorded them. 1. That a certain phone expert evidence needed to be heard. 2. That the police had failed to hand over phone downloads which proved his case. 3. That his solicitors had failed to get anything ready for trial, including independent phone downloads and phone forensics. 4 and 5. That the judge showed bias during his trial. 6. That the jury was lied to during the trial, including false evidence that he, Rochester, had recorded the attack. He says that it was actually on the phone at the time. He also says that there was evidence that he had a broken hand and was on a phone call for about 2 hours that was not mentioned. 7, that he knew 3 of the jurors through previous wrongdoings, but the judge wrongly allowed him to stay in the jury. 8, that the judge wrongly removed him from the trial. 9, that his leading counsel had shouted at him. And 10, that the judge was poisoning him with liquid radiation and was a sex offender. So the man who, according to the jury, organised the planned filmed 2-hour torture of Vincent Jordan has found a formal appeal to the second highest court in England and Wales, in which one of his 10 grounds of appeal is that the trial judge was poisoning him with liquid radiation and was a sex offender. So I need to be careful here, because there's a big temptation with a ground of appeal like that just to laugh, to treat it as ridiculous, to roll our eyes. And I don't really want to do that. Well, I do, but I'm not going to do that, because that final ground, irradiation, the accusation against the judge, it's not really the language of a man calculating, trying to game the system. That's the language of someone who is, at minimum, in a very different place mentally to where most people are. So we need to think about that and be considerate. But the question of whether Nathan Rochester is mentally well or was mentally well at the time of the trial, it's not one that we can answer. It's not one that the Court of Appeal answered either, because it didn't address his mental state at all, because it didn't need to. Because their job was to look at the ground he'd put forward and to ask whether any of them was arguable, not whether he was unwell, just whether any grounds had any merit. So let's look how the court handled it, because the Court of Appeal's response is, I think, model of how to deal with this kind of thing. Firm, courteous, complete, and unsentimental. So the court went through the grounds methodically. On the allegation of bias and police misconduct, the court said, and I quote, there is no basis for the various allegations of bias and impropriety by the judge or of misconduct by the police. On the ruling that the trial should continue without him, the court said the judge's ruling had been plainly. On the jurors that Rochester claimed to know through previous wrongdoing, the court said there was no basis for the applicant's assertions. The court said there was no basis for the applicant's assertions in respect of the identified jurors, and the judge was therefore right to keep them on jury. On the allegation that his solicitors and barristers had been incompetent. The court said there was no basis to support the allegation of inadequate or incompetent advice or representation by his legal representatives, whether solicitors or counsel. On the missing phone evidence, the court noted that counsel had confirmed in court back in April 2024 that all relevant material had been provided. And on the phone expert evidence, the court said it provided no coherent or arguable basis to doubt the safety of these convictions. So we're left with one, aren't we? Liquid radiation claim. And the court did not specifically address the liquid radiation claim because it didn't need to. The court found that the appeal had no prospects of success and was, and this is the phrase the Court of Appeal uses when it really wants to put a marker down, totally without merit. So totally without merit. So that phrase does have legal weight. It's a formal finding. It signals to the system that this was not a genuine arguable appeal. It was an application that should not have been brought at all. So the extension of time was refused, the appeal was dismissed, the conviction stands. So now he will serve his time. So that's where we're at the end of April 2026. 2 appeals. Well, I wrote this in April, that's why, but we're now in June, so apologies for that. But 2 appeals, both reviews, 3 convictions standing, 3 sentences continuing, combined 36 years between the 3 defendants. But a 4th man somewhere is walking around, and Vincent Jordan somewhere getting on with whatever life looks like after a night like the one he had in April 2023. So I want to come back to that silence just to finish on that, if that's okay. To the choice Vincent Jordan made not to speak, because all of the strange and disturbing parts of this case, I think his silence is a part we haven't really reckoned with it yet, have we? So I want to come back before I close to Vincent Jordan, because we spent most of this episode talking about the people who hear him, the planner, the partner, the late recruit, and the unnamed, the judge who managed the trial, judges who heard the appeals, the lawyers, the jury, the police officers who chased Mercedes and found a sandwich bag of hair on the road. But the person at the centre of it all, the man who this story is actually about, has been almost silent throughout. And I think we have to sit with that silence before we leave this case behind. He gave the police, Vincent Jordan, one sentence, attacked by 3 persons with knives and poles. And that's it. That's everything he gave the system. He didn't name names. He didn't describe faces. He didn't help build a case. He didn't testify at the trial. He didn't make a victim impact statement that ended up in any public documents. The Court of Appeal noted, with what sounds like a small flicker of judicial frustration, that he had given no evidence of psychological or other effects, that there was no statement from him about what these 2 hours had done to him. There was no account of his suffering. There was, on the public record, absolutely nothing. So the prosecution had to make their case without him. They had to build a false imprisonment charge from what they could piece together from forensics, from the video, from Rochester's phone, from Hall's Mercedes, from the sandwich bag, from the gun, from CCTV, from ANPR, from self-site data, from the testimony of co-defendants. They had to argue that Jordan had been rendered vulnerable by the plan that placed him naked, asleep in that bed, not because Jordan told them, but because the inferences from the rest of the evidence supported it. And they succeeded. The conviction stood. The sentences were imposed. The appeals were refused. So why hasn't Vincent Jordan spoken? Why does a man who was lured into a flat, stripped of his clothes, tied up, beaten for 2 hours, stabbed 9 times, filmed for someone else's entertainment, and stripped of his hair as a final humiliation, why does that man refuse to give evidence against the people who did it? Now, I don't know the answer to this. And I don't think Rach knew before she left either, but I want to be honest about that. The court doesn't know. The judgment doesn't speculate. None of the reporting I found gives an answer. So anything I say here is just me thinking out loud, please, people. It's not official. But I think there's 3 possibilities worth sitting with. The first is simple fear. The unnamed 4th man is still out there. The people who organised this attack had access to firearms. We know that because Salvador Hall was driving around with one 2 days later. The world Vincent Jordan moved in, whatever world that was, is clearly a world where loaded American military pistols are being carried between cities by men who spent 2 hours torturing someone in a bedroom. Giving evidence against people from that world, from inside that world, is not a neutral act. It carries consequences, it carries risks. And maybe Vincent Jordan made a calculation that whatever police could offer him in terms of protection or justice was less than what silence could offer him in terms of survival. So the second thing is possibility is something a bit more complicated. The motivation for this attack, as recorded by the court, was Olivia Williams' allegation that Vincent Jordan had abused her. We don't know if the allegation was true. We don't know if Jordan had done anything to Williams at all, but he would have known whether he'd done something or not. And if he had, if there was any truth in what Olivia was saying, then giving evidence against the people who attacked him would have meant opening up his own conduct to scrutiny. It would have meant his life being examined. It would have meant witnesses being called. It would have meant potentially charges against him being brought. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened. I want to be clear about that. There's no public evidence that Vincent abused Olivia. He was never charged with anything against her. The allegation was never tested. But the possibility of it, the risk of it, might have been enough to make him decide that the safer thing was to stay quiet and that the system do what it was going to do without his help. But the third possibility is maybe the simplest but the saddest. Maybe he just didn't want to live through it again. Giving evidence at trial for false imprisonment and grievous bodily harm is not a clinical process. It's not filling out a form. It means going into a witness box in a courtroom in front of strangers and describing out loud in detail while being cross-examined by defense barristers what was done to you. It means watching a video. It means looking at photographs of your own injuries. It means sitting a few feet away from the people who held you down and cut your hair off and sang while you bled. It means doing all of that with no guarantee of conviction, no guarantee that any of it will be worth the cost. So some victims do that. Some victims find something in themselves that lets them stand in that box and tell their story. We've covered cases on this podcast where the victim's courage was the entire reason the conviction happened. But not every victim can, and not every victim should be expected to. And sometimes the kindest thing the system can do is build a case around the victim's silence rather than insisting on their voice. The system in this case did exactly that. The prosecution made the case without him. The judge sentenced it without him. The Court of Appeal upheld the sentences without him. He never had to walk in that courtroom. He never had to speak. And maybe that's not a failure. Maybe that's the system working as it should, recognising that the victim had been through enough, that the burden of proof shouldn't always be the burden of testimony. But I keep coming back to the question, and it's the one I asked at the start of this episode if you're still with us. When a victim won't tell his own story, who gets to tell it for him? And what do they leave out? The court told a version of Vincent Jordan's story, a careful, lawyerly version. They told us what happened to his body. They told us what was on the video. They told us about the dreadlocks, the knives, the poles, the singing, the sandwich bag, the gun. They told us the timeline, the geography, the cast list. They did a thorough job of it, but they couldn't tell us how he felt. They couldn't tell us what those 2 hours did to him. They couldn't tell us what he thinks about now, or what he sees when he closes his eyes, or whether he's still in Nottingham, or whether he's somewhere else, or whether he's still afraid. They couldn't tell us whether he forgives anyone, whether he's moved on, or whether the people who hurt him still occupy any space in his mind, or whether he's tried to put it all somewhere far away from himself. And that's the part of his story that's his. He kept it, and for whatever reason, that was his right. So today's episode was a case of Vincent Jordan, Olivia Williams, Nathan Rochester, and Salvador Leroy Hall, and a fourth person, a man whose name we don't know, who walked out of that flat in Nottingham in April 2023 and was never held to account for it. So I hope wherever Vincent Jordan is tonight, that he's somewhere safe, that he's somewhere quiet, that he's somewhere he doesn't have to think about any of this unless he chooses to. And I hope wherever that third man, that fourth person is tonight, that he knows we haven't forgotten him. So everyone, Rachel's not here to tell me what she thinks about this. Let me know in the comments. Even if it takes me a few days to respond, I will respond. YouTube especially, please. We're really trying with that. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do take a moment to rate and review us wherever you're listening. Why not share this episode with a friend? Follow us on social media. You can find us, Picture the Scene podcast, and all the usual places. And if there's a case you'd like us to cover, I can't promise anything, but drop us a message. We do read everything. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.